Welcome everyone to day 2 of the 7 Pillars of a Woman Challenge. Today we're going to talk about marriage and partnership in marriage, and this is the Love Her pillar. I have Nathan Cross, my husband of 18 years and 8 days, 18 years and 8 days with me, and we're going to dive deep into what is available in marriage. And I want to first start off by saying that some of you might be in this room right now listening to this pillar thinking, man, my marriage is broken, or I've had broken history of relationships, or my marriage hasn't worked out, or I've been married and remarried and married, whatever the story is. I just want you to know it's okay. There's an answer for all of it. And the beautiful thing about what we're doing here in the Her Effect is we're going back to life in Christ and all the restoration and redemption that God has in store for you. And I say this all the time, it's part of our tagline, but there's no mess too great. There's no story too broken. Just come as you are. But what we're going to do today is we're going to touch on some of the basics and how can you really, in 30 minutes, how can you really talk through everything that it pertains to a subject like marriage. So there's a much deeper journey here, but we're going to try to hit on some of the really important key things and dive deep into that. And what's really important to understand as well is that God has set up an order of things in every area of our life. So when we talk about business, I always talk about, He will bless the work of your hands. We talk about sowing, the law of sowing and reaping. There's an order of things in order to produce financial prosperity and prosperity in that sense. There's an order of things in raising children. There's an order of things in family and in marriage. And so, are you ready?
Yeah.
We're going to dive deep into this. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to touch base here and just go for it. Are you guys ready? I haven't looked at Facebook right now. So this is Song of Solomon 1-2. For everyone that doesn't know, it's okay if you're like, you know what, I don't really read the Bible. I haven't really read the Bible in a long time. It's okay. Now's a great time to start. But there's a whole book in the Bible dedicated to marriage, sex, relationship, romance. And so God cares about this. As a matter of fact, the subject of marriage, the institution of marriage, is very precious to the Lord, and He created it. And so there's no topic in the subject of marriage that's off the table. Everything from sex to all of it. And so we're not going to dive into every area of marriage today specifically, but we're going to touch again on some of the important key things. But this is the guiding verse, Song of Solomon 1-2. This book, I love reading this book. When Nathan and I were dating, and when actually we had just gotten married, our pastor was like, you should read this and watch this whole series on the Song of Solomon. And it was so fun to watch, and it opened my eyes to how much is available to us within marriage, and that God's not afraid to talk about all the really nitty-gritty marriage sex things. But it says, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. And I chose this verse as the guiding verse for this pillar because I think it depicts a beautiful relationship. It speaks of romance, it speaks of passion, it speaks of intimacy, and it just, for me, I'm like, man, this is what we all want. We want those tender kisses. We want this delight within marriage. We want this love that is more delightful than wine. And God put that desire inside of us to not only receive intimate love, but to also give it, and steady love and the deep burning embers. And there's all different kinds of love within marriage. As far as, there's sex love, and there's like committed love, and then there's like intellectual love and friendship love, all of that within marriage. So let's dive in here. The first thing to understand is that marriage is available to man, or marriage is available to make life really good and fulfilling for mankind. How many of you guys have heard or read in the beginning of Genesis where God says two are better than one? And I think sometimes we think marriage is just this thing where you have a wedding, spend a lot of money and then you spend the rest of your life together. But what's the purpose of marriage? Ultimately, it's to have a really good life together and be very fulfilling. Um, Marriage is a very good thing. Marriage is precious, as I talked about. It's very precious to the Lord, and it's a very precious institution. But here's the key. And with everything that is good in life um, comes a responsibility on our part to achieve that. And it says success in marriage is not merely attainable by prayers. So for all of you that are like, you know what, I'm like praying over my marriage, that is a really good thing to do. We always want to be praying and asking the Lord for his blessing. And but there's something even far beyond. And here in the Her Effect, you're going to hear this a lot, but personal responsibility in every area of our life is the key to bearing fruit, to success. When you think about, man, I want a really beautiful marriage, my marriage is broken, or I have an amazing marriage, but I want an even more amazing marriage. We have a responsibility. So this incredible marriage is achieved by consciously working it out and accepting required responsibility. So that's the precipice for everything. Everything good is we have to take responsibility for what for our part. Marriage is, of course, meant to be exciting, fulfilling, and exhilarating. And this is a great time. This entering into this channel just is a really great time to start taking notes. Like, where are there areas that you really want to expand and bear fruit in? I know for me, after 18 years of marriage, I'm so excited about like having an even more incredible marriage and continuing to work on myself in a way that just blossoms our relationship in greater ways. Here's something interesting. I wanted to speak this life over all of you who are coming into this particular pillar with a broken heart. And it makes me just even get a little bit emotional, but I understand, when Nathan and I first got married, we worked through a lot of stuff and we had a lot of heartbreak stuff in our first couple of years of marriage. But we worked through those things. And I just wanted to speak this life over you. Just as God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul, aligning yourself again with the order of things and with what God's design for marriage is. He is the breath of life. He will breathe life into your marriage. He will breathe life into those nostrils, and your marriage can become alive and active and a living, breathing, beautiful thing again. So I just speak life over all of you that are here today with a broken heart. For all of you that are like, I'm having an amazing marriage, or we've worked really hard to get where we are, or we just got married and everything's awesome. That's incredible. There's more life and more abundance waiting for all of us. And I just wanted to say, do not despair. He is our ever-present help in time of need. Okay, so here we're going to dive in, and Nathan's going to do a little bit of teaching around this is a fundamental principle within marriage: covenant versus promise. And I'm going to kind of let you just take it away here.
Yeah. So that was great. Everything you're sharing is beautiful, and hopefully it gives people a lot of hope for the future, because none of us have a perfect marriage, so it's a deep concept that we could really dive into. But I guess one of the first things is to understand that marriage is God's institution. He created it, so he gets to define it. That's how I see it. So man always changes things and wants to treat it like it's something that they can just manipulate and let it evolve, but a covenant is not like that. So a promise is like a promise, or a vow is, you gave someone your word to do something, but if you break that promise, it's not like there's crazy consequences, usually it's not a big deal. So we make promises and we break them. And
hopefully not, but it does happen.
People in general,
right?
Yeah, the human beings. So we don't treat a marriage like that, and that's the problem, I think, is a lot of us think about marriage in terms of a promise. Okay, so a covenant is much deeper than that. It's much more binding. It's I mean, we could talk more about the details of the covenant later, but you should understand that as God defines marriage, it's a covenant, and that covenant is supposed to be until death. So there's no breaking that covenant just because you're having problems. You don't want to break the covenant. It's supposed to be this lifelong, beautiful thing. And just another side to that same coin is that the marriage covenant is meant to be a metaphor for God's relationship with us. And God says, I will not break my covenant and I will not alter the thing that has gone out of my lips. In Psalm, I think 84. So it's, he is a covenant keeping God. Like he doesn't break his covenant. Even if we screw up our part, he's like, I'm going to stay faithful. And it's such a beautiful picture of love and forgiveness and long suffering in the face of, betrayal and trauma or hurt or all the bad things that we do to each other. You know, we can't just say, oh, the covenant's broken. It's not broken. It's binding. And like we can tell you from experience, when you don't give yourself another option, that's how we came into this thing. Like the D word was not an option. Like we didn't talk about that. No matter how bad it got, we were okay, we're committed and we're
And
going to fix this and
at
we're
the
going to
same
figure it out.
time, he's a God of second chances, infinite. Like he's a God of restoration. So if that has been
Absolutely.
the history, that's okay. Now we're going to start fresh and we're going to talk about how to basically suck the juice out of everything that marriage can be for you. And so when we talk about covenant, there's a reason that things have gone awry in families. There's a reason that I like to talk about order. And it's funny because as we were having this discussion this morning, we've just been kind of talking about marriage. And if you look at the order of things, like here's what God's design is for marriage, and let's look at it like it's a clock, right? And there's all these little cogs and springs and things that work together perfectly so that this clock functions. But if you were going to move one of these little cogs and put it up here and put another one of these bigger cogs and move it around or take it out of order, then you have a clock that doesn't work. And so the covenant is kind of like that. When you operate based on my responsibility is to serve and to love and to honor as unto the Lord, then God will bear fruit in my life, even if and it's funny because I was like, this might be a really interesting topic to really discuss because we could go through all the fluffy things and make it really fluffy, but I really wanted to just talk about some of these different angles. Um, but the idea of covenant is that when you work in the order of things, um, what's supposed to happen is that everything else in your life works. And there's a reason I did the lover pillar after the supernatural pillar, because marriage, if you're married, it comes before children, it comes before business, it comes before everything. And when you have a home that is working and functioning in order, then there's peace and there's life and there's joy. And I believe that a lot of the reason that there's so much chaos in the world, chaos because of the family, the broken unit of the family, because there's a lot of things out of order. So let's talk about a little bit about what that looks like. um, I mentioned this, but Colossians 3:17, and whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it as unto the Lord. And so when we were struggling in the early years of our marriage, and there was a vicious toxic cycle going on between us. I'm words of affirmation. Nathan grew up in a really sarcastic family, and so he would say things that would hurt my feelings, and then I would get upset and he would shut down, and then I would get even more upset. And so as we both began to take responsibility for our part, which is, the Bible talks about love your wife as Christ loved the church. He began to focus on his part, and I began to focus on coming under his mission and getting on board with him and getting on board with what he was doing, and he was getting on board with what I was doing, and we were both working on ourselves. But ultimately, I began to serve and love him as unto the Lord, and there began to be healing, and something supernatural took place. And when we began to bring order into our marriage, everything else started to flourish. And so one of the parts of our challenge today, I'm going to have one challenge because I want to make it really simple for you because we're doing this challenge. But part of this is I want you, as you're thinking about this topic of marriage today, um, whoever's listening, even if you've got your husband on here with you, both of you commit to the good of one another, right? If one of the things that we started to do and early on was not to assume that one or the other was intentionally trying to hurt, right? Because a lot of times we can get our feelings hurt because immediately, like, we talked about yesterday that the enemy's whole goal is to steal, kill, and destroy. And so sometimes those voices that we hear where you're like, oh man, he did that and he hurt my feelings and he's so such and such and she's so such and such, that is the enemy at work looking to suck out the life and snuff out the life in your marriage. And so be on guard and be aware of what you're allowing your mind to meditate on. I started to think good thoughts of him. I went to a conference when we first got married, and I remember one of the speakers, she had written a book, and they were talking about sex. They were talking about all these amazing topics, and she's like, you know what? You should be thinking. She was talking to a room filled with women. She's like, you should be thinking about your husband all day. Think about his body. Think about his voice. Think about the things that you love about him. Like, meditate on why you married him and how incredible he is. And I started to do that. And I thought about like, and it was like every day that I do that. And now after 18 years, when I'm, like if we ever have discussions or whatever, and I go back to that place of falling in love with him all over again, but committing to the good of one another is such a fundamental principle, because ultimately, if you're always the intention is to serve and love, then how can things go wrong, right? And it's a selfless act to constantly be committing to the good of one another. And then resolve your differences. There's a great scripture that says, how can two walk together unless they be agreed? And so we came into our marriage like having already discussed pretty major topics like how to raise our children, how to handle finances, and sex, the things that tear people apart. Have open discussions with your spouse and have boundaries around, like, when we first got married, like, we would both get so upset somebody would leave the room, and we created a boundary around, okay, we're going to sit down and talk through this, and nobody's going to leave, and we're going to keep the conversation open even if we get offended. And the goal is like, we're going to try our best to not make use statements, to take personal responsibility, and to have loving words. And so, how you resolve your differences, have boundaries around how you're going to do that. Nobody gets to leave the room, nobody gets to get up and walk out the door. There are differences that can be resolved. And sometimes it's even like, okay, maybe we can agree to disagree. But if you're not married yet, I would recommend that you have those heavy discussions before you even enter into marriage, and make sure that you're on the same page. So that's really key there, is resolve your differences. And for all of us ladies, but even just within the emotional, like, I want to talk to men and women in this because there's a responsibility for both of us to create a haven. For a woman, I love to create a haven in the home. And now um, having built our business for as long as we have, I have help in the home. I have somebody that comes in and does grocery shopping and food prep, and somebody that cleans the house. And with 5 children, it doesn't always work that it's always perfectly in order, but the goal is to have peace in the home, to create a haven. I'm training the children up to be respectful, and they're well disciplined, and we're going to talk more about that in the mother pillar. But creating a haven means that both of you guys love to be in each other's presence. You love to come home. Everything that you do with each other in your home and just in your relationship, there's this sense of oasis and peace and restoration. And I tell you what, I love to be with him more than anybody and doing anything else in the world, because he's a haven to me. He's a safe place of love and kindness and wisdom. And we just have such an amazing friendship. So that's really important. And you can create that. If it's not there now, it's okay. Start today, look at, and we can even create a checklist at some point. How do you create a haven within your relationship and within your home? But bringing order into that is really critical. speak his language, speak her language. I put his because obviously I'm thinking through this, but both of you in your marriage speak each other's language. And so, we didn't learn this until what, seven, five,
It took a
seven,
while.
took a little while, but we are very different. We are totally opposite.
I had to learn to speak pink,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is like, it's definitely a foreign language to most guys. So
Yeah.
I've had this, been trying to help, people in marriages and counseling. And this is one of the things that always comes up, that you're really encouraging a man, learn to speak pink. All right. So
Right.
um,
Yeah, and that's not just love languages. I know, like I've grown to
yeah,
understand.
communication is a huge,
Yeah,
huge part of this.
yeah,
Yeah.
speak each other's language. I can sense Nathan now. Like if I have a topic I want to bring up that might be a heavier topic, or I need him to make decisions, oftentimes I'll be like, "Hey babe, do you have a minute to talk about this heavy thing or make a decision about this?" And I'm not just like, "Hey, I'm really honoring him." And so, and he'll be like, "You know what, I have a couple hours of work left to do. I don't have the mental capacity right now or the emotional capacity. Let's talk about that tonight." And so just always being in that place of respecting each other's you know soul.
Yeah.
But communication is really important. One of the key things too, and this is just more tactical, but not making you statements. I had to learn that in the beginning, because I'd be like, "You did this and you did that and you hurt me," and then I had to shift from, "My feelings were hurt when you said this." And so I'm not attacking him. That was a big thing. I used to attack Nathan and be like, "Meh." But coming and starting to just learn how to be tender with each other and speak in a way that honors um, romance. This is key. Um, I don't know about you guys, but I've been in a lot of faith-based circles, and oftentimes romance and sex is about him and like pleasing him. But I'm telling you, and I talk about this in some of our other, even in some of our circles, we have a product in our company that is like an intimacy oil. And I've talked about this before in different settings. And romance and sex is for our pleasure. It's for his pleasure, it's for her pleasure. And you guys should just have so much enjoyment and pleasure in sex and romance and creating romantic moments and creating with everything in life. Romance and love and um, marriage takes work.
Just for all the guys out there, you want to clarify that romance and sex are not the same
They're
thing.
not the same
Okay.
thing.
So
Right. Yeah. Right, exactly.
okay.
So romance, it's funny, when we were first married too, I remember in one of the books we read, but it was like, for him, speaking that romantic language at the beginning of the day, because we always heard this too, like, women are men are microwaves, women are crock pots. It takes us time to warm up emotionally, physically, all of that. And so for men out there, really being tender and doing things to connect with her heart, right? And for him, it's like, he's a microwave. Romance looks totally different for him than it does for her. But practice romance, practice having incredible sex, and talk to each other about what gives you pleasure. And I don't think that's talked about enough um in in enough circles. But pleasure, sex, romance, it's all stuff that you work on. It's stuff that you talk about. It's stuff that you should communicate about and be open about. um you have anything?
There's probably some people blushing.
It's okay if
On
you're
their own.
blushing, but really, um you should have such a great sex life and such an amazing romance story. But you have to write that, and you have to build it, and you have to work at it. And it doesn't always happen perfectly. Good Lord. I mean, for us, romance right now is like Nathan. He'll be like, "Hey, I remembered you said this thing and I picked it up from the store for you." And I'm like, "Oh, it's amazing." Like, it's not always bringing each other flowers and going on dates. It's like the little things sometimes. And so what makes your partner come alive and what makes them happy, do those little things. but you do have to practice it.
Yeah.
So here's your challenge for today, guys. And this is a lifelong, um, remember this for the rest of your life, is make your marriage a Garden of Eden. Remember in the Garden of Eden, there was every single thing that they needed for life. It was beautiful. It was full of life. It was full of fruit. There was streams and rivers. There were gems and all kinds of precious metals and gold and trees and just everywhere you looked within the Garden of Eden. I imagine the essences were just pure and lovely, and the tastes were just incredible and robust. And um, the peace and the joy in this place of restoration um, and a hideaway for Adam and Eve, it just was incredible. And so start taking note and taking audit of areas that you can take responsibility for growing yourself as a husband or as a wife. If you're a woman who is tends to be argumentative, start to think about how you can communicate in a way that brings honor. Or for him, if you're harsh with her, there's a great scripture that says that she's like fine china. That was a huge one for Nathan to remember, because he, again, was sarcastic and his words would just be so, and unintentionally, but he started to treat me like fine china. And it doesn't mean that you're weak, ladies. It means that you're delicate and precious. So begin to cultivate your marriage as if it was a garden. Get rid of the weeds, get rid of the things that will entangle you, get rid of the things that can be obstacles in bringing this Eden to life. But um, I'm super excited. I want to hear from you guys. Please do type in the comments, and I want to hear from you after the fact. We're going to have an accountability time after this whole challenge is done, and I just want to hear from everyone, and I'll share testimonies from some of the ladies, and it's going to be a great time. So here's your challenge for the day. We believe in you. There's so much hope and life just waiting for you. Love you all, and we'll talk to you again. Can't wait to see you guys tomorrow. Talk again soon. Bye, everybody.
Wow.